Hi there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, my name is Scott Harris King, and in this video, if you'll allow me to, I want to go on a little bit of a rant about notorious art thief Roy Lichtenstein. Before I do that, though, I just real quick want to thank everyone who's been watching my videos and subscribing, and I specifically want to just give a couple shout outs to some other YouTubers and YouTube channels, people who have been really supportive. I want to give a shout out to the Gray Man, and I want to mention the silver-haired Bronze Age Babe comics, the old guys who like old comics and Dracula's comics and things. All of those channels have been really great. All the people that do those have really supported me a lot in here. So I'm going to have the links to all of their channels below. They all have cool different takes on comics, a little bit different content from each of them. So please check them out, and you might find something on one of those channels that you like. Now the rant. Now, Lichtenstein, of course, made his name as a pop artist in the 1960s, primarily by doing these paintings like Crying Girl or In the Car or Drowning Girl or Nurse that have since sold for tens of millions of dollars on the market. And they're cool looking, but what not everyone fully appreciates is the fact that almost every single one of Roy Lichtenstein's art pieces from that period, all of these famous pop artworks, they're almost all direct, exact copies of published comic book works by artists who got no credit and received no money and no benefit at all from Lichtenstein appropriating their work. Now, I'm a creator myself, and it's absolutely infuriating to me, not just that Lichtenstein did this, but also just the way the art community sort of not only allows him to get away with it, but celebrates the thievery. I'm primarily a writer, and as a writer, there's no way you could do this. It would be called for plagiarism, you'd be blacklisted, your works would be ridiculed. You know, there's just, it's a huge stigma. But in the art world, for some reason, if you successfully rip off someone else's vision and someone else's work, it's totally cool. So I really just, it's so frustrating. I wanted to talk a little bit about this and show some examples. And I also want to show you some of the original comics and show you some tips on how you can sort of honor the original artists by buying the original back issues and getting the original artwork much cheaper than it would cost you to get a Lichtenstein knockoff version. So I'm going to go over a few of the issues. I'll show you some from my collection and talk about that. But basically, it's just so frustrating, particularly because even if you look online now, there's been a sort of a growing movement online, spearheaded by a guy by the name of David Barcelou, who has a whole website dedicated to tracking down and revealing the sources that Lichtenstein stole from. You can visit his website. He has a Facebook page. He doesn't always cite the issue numbers, though. In most cases, he does tell you the artist, but not the issue numbers. And the reverse is true just about everywhere else. Like if you look up some of these paintings on Wikipedia or something, it'll mention that it was, maybe it'll tell you the title even of the comic. Like it might say, oh, he based that on something from Girls' Romances or something from All American Men at War, but it won't list the issue number, and it specifically won't tell you who the original artist was. Like they're not going to give credit to Irv Novick, or they're not going to give credit to Tony Abruzzo because, you know, it's just part of the art community. They want to give Lichtenstein, and I think it's because they didn't realize originally that they weren't original works, and so by the time it sort of became widely known that he was stealing all this stuff, they had to protect their own image. You know, the critics that had praised this stuff couldn't then go back and be like, oh, sorry, we actually should have been giving Russ Heath all the credit for this because he's the one that actually came up with this. So they basically circled the wagons and doubled down on praise because otherwise they would have looked stupid. but it's just really frustrating. You know, Russ Heath in particular is something that sticks in my craw because at the end of his life, he had a lot of medical issues and he didn't have any money. There were like fundraisers to get him stuff. And meanwhile, paintings of Lichtenstein's that were based on Russ Heath comics, panels that he had drawn that Lichtenstein just copied almost line for line, those were selling for tens of millions of dollars. And I don't really have a problem with Lichtenstein using the comic art as the base for his work. The problem is that he refused to credit any of the artists. Because just imagine when Russ Heath needed that money at the end of his life, if the art community was like, oh, the guy that was the originator of this image we love so much needs help. Maybe we can commission him to do something, or we can, see the value in his work. But no, that never happened. All Lichtenstein had to do was give proper credit to cite his sources, and it would have been totally fine. But instead, the creators that he shamelessly ripped off got absolutely nothing. I heard a story at one point that when this was happening in the early mid 60s, when Lichtenstein started getting a lot of praise for this, a lot of the comic artists at the time were really ticked off. And so they basically invited him to a meeting of like this cartoonists guild. And he basically came there and was like, oh, gee, shucks, you guys. I never thought it was going to take off like this. And I certainly, didn't mean any disrespect. It just, it just came as a surprise to me. And they sort of went, oh, he seems like a nice guy. Okay, well, we'll give him a pass. Well, I really wish they hadn't done that and held his feet to the fire, because he just got away with screwing all of these people. So, the comics themselves, let's talk about that a little bit. As I mentioned, some of the most famous works that he ever did, almost all of his most famous works, are based directly on panels from comics. Now, I don't have all of these, particularly some of the romance books. They're ones that I haven't been able to track down. The big one that you should be aware of if you're diving through long boxes and stuff, and if you're at a local comic store and they have a romance collection, even if you're someone that never goes in the romance section, there's a couple things I can tell you to look for. The big one that you want to look for is Secret Hearts number 83, because Secret Hearts 83, you couldn't tell by the cover, but on the inside, the splash page is a full splash by Tony Abruzzo that Lichtenstein used as the basis for his most famous painting, The Drowning Girl. And low-grade copies of this on eBay will they go for basically three figures, even really low grade. There was one just recently, if you go in, I just went into like the eBay sales, and there's one a little while ago that sold for $86, and it was like a 1.5 with a detached cover, and it had a piece out of the back cover, and there was staining. It actually presented fairly well, but that's about as low as you're ever going to get right now on Secret Hearts 83. And in mid-grade, romance comics are very hard to find in high grade, so the curve is very different in terms of the pricing. With a lot of these romance books, if you get them above like a 5, they start to increase very rapidly. But basically, a mid-grade copy of this in like the 4 to 5 range is going to set you back like $350 right now. And if you do have a higher grade copy, and I don't mean like a 9, I mean like you have like a 7 or something, you might be looking at $700, $800, $900 for Secret Hearts 83. And again, a lot of dealers, a lot of like local comic shops, your neighborhood dealers, most of them don't know anything about romance. They know about superhero books. They know what to value a Hulk 181 at, but a Secret Hearts 83, they've never heard of it. They don't know anything about it. And so there's definitely places out there that will have this in their back issue boxes for $5, $10. And so that's a big one to look out for. Another one is Secret Hearts 88, which is the source of another one of his very famous paintings, The Crying Girl. Again, I don't have either of these. I just put in a bid just yesterday on a copy of Secret Hearts 88 that was actually in a lot. So it didn't say anything about Lichtenstein. It didn't say, even the number Secret Hearts 88. But enough people saw it that knew about it like me that I bid. It was a lower grade copy, and I bid I think 120 was my top bid, and I just got completely blown out of the water on that. And again, this is a book that you're not going to be able to find a deal on it on eBay unless someone happens to put it up for buy it now, and you're within like the first 5 minutes of that happening. You're not really going to find a deal online with this, but it's something that you could find in your local comic shop. Another big one to look for is one that I have here. It's All American Men of War number 89. Now, if you look online, you'll see a couple articles about this. To me, this is one of the most underrated sort of key books. It has been picking up in interest over the last few years. The big dollars in the Lichtenstein comics community are really in the romance books, but with Lichtenstein's paintings, he also did a lot of war books, and he picked a lot from All American Men of War. In fact, what's key about this book is it's not just one or two paintings based on this. There's actually 5 different panels in here that were the basis for 5 different Lichtenstein paintings, and this is the only issue that I'm aware of where the image that Lichtenstein based his painting on is on the cover. It's this one down here. So this has the source for the famous triptych that Lichtenstein did called Wham. That's in here. It's by Irv Novick. Russ Heath has some stuff in here that Lichtenstein ripped off. I mentioned earlier that Drowning Girl is probably his most famous and important work, but there's a school of thought that believes the painting Wham from All American Men of War 89 is actually his most important work. This is one reason why I think issue 89 of All American Men of War is so important, because not only is it the source of Wham, it's the source of 4 other major paintings by Lichtenstein, plus he did this 6th pencil drawing based on an image that appears on the cover. So it's actually the source of 6 different Lichtenstein works, including some of his biggest and most famous. So for me, it's at least as important as Secret Hearts 83, maybe more important, but for whatever reason, I think the war books are a little bit easier to get than the romance books. For whatever reason, it hasn't quite reached that height in terms of value. I actually have 4 copies of this, and I didn't pay more than $10 for any of them. If you go on eBay, lower grade copies of this routinely sell between $50 and say $80, and I have never actually seen a higher grade one. So yeah, I've got 2 copies that are about a 4.5, and then I've got 2 that are more like 2.5. So I've never actually seen a high grade. I don't know what a higher grade copy would be worth. I still think it's significantly undervalued, especially compared to some of the romance books that get this kind of money where they only are the source of one image. But I also understand that Lichtenstein's romance paintings are more iconic than his war books. Here's another war book that has, it's this next issue, All American Men of War 90. There's another Lichtenstein painting based on this one, and again, mine's a mid-grade. It's got a subscription crease, which is kind of rare to find for books from this period. Just that there weren't that many people that really had home subscriptions, but it does have a subscription crease. I paid $9 for this, and I think if you got it on eBay again, it would probably be a $40 or $50 book. Before we move on from All American Men of War 90, I just want to read a thing from Wikipedia about it, because it's a perfect example of what I'm talking about in terms of art critics, both in the past and even today, still just bending themselves into pretzels to give Lichtenstein credit that belongs to other people. So I'm just going to read from the Wikipedia article here. In 1972, it was regarded as, quote, this is a critic from 1970 talking, quote, perhaps Lichtenstein's most ambitious exercise in strangely uniting, visually as well as figuratively, warring elements, end quote. And then the Wikipedia article goes on to say, As I Open Fire exhibits Lichtenstein's formal imagination, we see successive tighter views of the gun muzzles in action, accompanied by onomatopoeia, which provides cinematic flow despite the varying skies. As I Opened Fire is regarded as a very uncompromising military triptych. Okay, and then the people in Wikipedia go on to talk about the composition, and these quotes from the critics are specifically praising this revolutionary composition that supposedly reveals what Lichtenstein's, unparalleled genius are. Every single element that they're talking about is in the original art from Jerry Grandenetti. The composition, the 3 panels, everything about it is done by Jerry Grandenetti. The only thing that Lichtenstein did was he slightly tilted some of the pieces. And the Wikipedia article goes on to say that he improved it because if you slightly tilt those elements, all of a sudden it opens up these new vistas. It's just absolute bullcrap. And yet the art community has to just pretend that the original artists were just, unimportant, and Lichtenstein was some sort of genius for reinterpreting their work by basically copying it line for line and then passing it on as his own. And just a couple other books from my collection here I want to talk about. This is Secret Hearts 84. My copy is a really low grade copy that I got in a lot of old romance comics off of eBay. It looks nice, but the cover is completely split and detached. This is the source of his painting, Kiss with a Cloud. And this is there's a whole slew of these romance books that are obscure. They haven't broken out really, except among hardcore romance collectors and art aficionados, and there's a lot like this where it's some of his lesser known paintings, so the comics are also lesser known. Things like Girls Romance at 79, which I don't have, is another example of that, a book where you might be able to get a deal even on eBay because it's less known that his work appeared in it, but for those who do know, those prices are still creeping up, so I wanted to show that. And finally, another important one here, It's Girls Romances 105. This is the source of his painting Sleeping Girl. At one point, the painting for Sleeping Girl held the record for the most expensive Lichtenstein painting ever sold. I think it sold for something like $48 million or something about 8 years ago now. It's, again, a Tony Abruzzo interior panel, uncredited like all of these. And so this is a book that is still a little under the radar. It is sort of rising in profile. It's got a really cool cover by Abruzzo. I got very lucky on this. This is one of these instances where someone didn't know what it was and they put it up with a low buy it now, and I happened to be right place, right time. I grabbed it before anyone else noticed it. So I only paid a few dollars for it. The person I got it from on eBay, they shipped it just in an envelope, no, not even a backing board. And so when it came, it was actually had been folded in half. Luckily, it didn't leave a crease. And after 3 or 4 months of having it sitting under a big pile of heavy books, I was able to flatten that back out. So no permanent damage done, but that was, yeah, everyone hates when that happens. So that's my little video and rant about Roy Lichtenstein. Again, my main problem is just that he didn't credit any of the artists. Now, there are some art critics who actually place the blame for that on DC Comics because DC didn't credit the artists in the books. And I think there's not that much validity to that argument. Basically, as I mentioned, Lichtenstein knew the artists. He was invited to the cartoonist thing. He showed up there and talked to them. So, it's not like he had to rely on the credits here. Even at the time, I think he was aware of some of these artists, and certainly within a few years, he knew who the artists were because he had met them and they had been in contact with him to complain about his thievery. And then certainly in later years, like there's no excuse, maybe in 1962 when he bought this off the stands, he didn't know who the artist was. But, by 1968 or 69 or 72, he knew who the artists were, and he lived, decades after that and never rectified his issue. I know Russ Heath told a sad story where He had resigned himself to really not getting any credit for any of the work that was appropriated by Lichtenstein, but he wanted to at least just sit down and have Lichtenstein, buy him dinner. He wanted to just have a chance to talk to him, and he apparently had been in contact with Lichtenstein a couple times to see if they could just, hang out and have dinner together, and uh, that never happened. Lichtenstein just blew him off, and that's just sort of par for the course for this whole thing. It's just infuriating as a comic fan, as a fan of art, and as a creator when stuff like this happens. And I think it's incumbent on all of us as comic book fans and collectors, and comic historians to set the record straight and make sure that even if the art community is going to rally around behind their complete bullcrap decisions, the general public viewing the art should know who the true stars were. The people who don't get the credit: Irv Novick and Jerry Grandenetti and Russ Heath and J. Scott Pike and Tony Abruzzo, all the great romance artists and war comic artists and other artists who don't get any credit for how great their works were, even as their works are hanging in art galleries all around the world. So thanks very much for watching. There'll be more content soon. Let me know if you like this video. If you want, I can do more videos where I'm sort of giving collecting tips. I don't really mind doing that. One thing about the romance community is part of the reason these are so expensive is they're so hard to find. So while I would love to be the one to find a Secret Hearts 83 in a back issue bin for $10, if someone else finds it and brings it to market, that means there's more copies available for all of us. And the reason that these are so expensive is that there's a lot of people that want these for the collection and just can't find them because romance comics are so hard to find. So if I can mobilize some of you smart collectors to go out to your LCSs and uncover these buried treasures, it's a win for everybody. It's a win for you because you get to see some cool comics you've never seen before, and it's another win for you if you resell it and make a big profit. But it's also a win for us in the collecting community because more of these come to market and come to light, and more romance and war collectors get a chance to get their hands on these comics that they want but cannot find anywhere else. So I can talk about some more sort of hidden gems from different genres and just give you some of the collecting tips that I have and some things that I look for, some sort of obscure back issues. If you're interested in that, let me know. I can certainly talk about that in some future videos. Just let me know what you think. And I've got a like button, I've got a bell and a subscribe logo, and there's some videos you can watch. So thanks again. I'll see you next time, and keep hunting those comics.